Welcome into this sacred space of three spiritual besties. Grab a seat and join us for raw and unfiltered conscious conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to Conscious Conversations with your hosts, Ashley.
Nicole.
And Brittany.
And today our episode is about the duality of emotions. And just a little bit into that topic, we're going to be talking about how there's different frequencies to emotions, how those play in our own personal lives, as well as how the energy can be both a positive or potentially negative, or high frequency, potentially low frequency within each emotional event or frequency, if that makes sense.
So I think we should start off by explaining like what duality means to us individually. For me, duality is kind of like a balance, but it's also opposing forces coexisting at the same time. So if you're feeling angry, but you're also sad about something, or happy and scared, those are different emotions on different sides of the spectrum, but you can feel them simultaneously.
I like that. I think it gives me like paradox vibes, which I enjoy. It's like it's like two truths at the same time, which I really enjoy. Because when I first got into my journey, everyone was like, it's up to you. It's follow your truth. And I'm like, I'm not sure what that is. And isn't there like a universal right and wrong kind of thing? Was really what I was personally trying to figure out for myself. So when I met duality, I was like, oh, I can have my truth simultaneously while others are holding space for theirs. So whenever there's kind of like a conflict I'm experiencing, I'm like, okay, that's their truth, that's their perspective. Then I have my truth and my perspective, and hopefully we can have a dualistic kind of even ground between the two of us.
I think for myself, when I think about the dualistic nature of spirituality, especially, I'm thinking more of a separation of there is myself as Brittany, and then there's myself as a spiritual being. So I step into more of those types of frequencies when I'm dealing within the dualistic nature of anything really. For me, thinking about opposing forces, typically I think people would think of like good and bad, right? Good and evil or whatever. To me, those two things don't exist because those are beliefs based upon how would you say this? Like a personal, not just opinion, but beliefs and also influence, right? So yeah, with what you two are kind of saying, I really do agree with the aspects of spirituality that can play into this, but I also try to take away the definition of what duality could be, and I try to just really feel into what those things mean for me going forward, in whatever it is I'm working on in the moment. I think a lot of my personal belief and opinion on that is it comes from who I work with and my team, my spiritual team. And I've really had to question the motives of others, the motives of those within the spiritual community, not just amongst us, but even what is taught to us in like things like church and school, or families. And understanding that your idea, your truth of what that could be, it could be completely different than mine, and learning to accept all of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that perspective on it because it does make me think a lot about yourself and your not self. But also, when you talk about like in the spirituality community and in other types of communities, the idea of good and bad and right and wrong, there's also like this overhaul when you first start getting into spirituality of like love and light, love and light. And then you kind of feel like when you start hitting that shadow self part of your journey, that it's wrong and it's bad because you start to see things in a different way than how you've been, I don't want to say programmed, but like influenced to believe that spirituality is. And that's not always the case.
That's a really good word. Programming was what was coming to mind for me a lot, because I think a lot of our behaviors are based on the word programming. I'll just kind of like take a second to say what I think programming is. It's a lot of like societal norms or paths that are projected onto us from the media, from our families, from so many different places that kind of put a buffer between us and our consciousness and our soul, and those identities, those spaces that the ego really clings to when it comes to processing duality, processing emotions. A lot of the time we put a lot of weight, or I'm even going to use the phrase kind of like currency or like meaning into certain emotional frequencies, whether they're projected to us or coming from us. And duality kind of leaves space for being, sometimes an emotion can be a neutral thing, and it can also be your voice kind of speaking to you in some manner that speaks into kind of like triggers and different energies that come to the surface. But when it comes to kind of right and wrong or light and dark, like all of that energy comes to a point of duality, which essentially kind of is balance in a way as well.
I think of how it exists in the body, which is at like equilibrium, right? When everything is balanced in the body, you're in that state. And so that's kind of, it's funny to think about what duality is because you think like two things, right? But in actuality, duality is three things. It's the coming together of the two sides, and then you're in that state of complete balance, right? So it's really interesting when you think of it that way. um the thing that made me think of this was actually like our little, I always want to call us a tripod, our little tripod of friends here. And for myself, I really take a lot of the things and the influence that you guys have in my life, and they are such opposing opinions, and sometimes and then I really think of it in a way of like how it really, you both of you really encompass both sides of myself and like make me kind of who I am and influence who I am, and I find it really cool.
So I find it funny that you said influence, right? Because we're also talking about how the influence of outside sources can help us determine who we are, who we're not, what we like, what we don't like, and that also like touches on duality in the sense of how much it affects us physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It's not just, oh, well, I'm feeling happy today and then tomorrow I'm going to feel sad. It's literally like we have the two sides of us. There's the masculine side, the feminine side, and then right, left, up, down, every which way. You can kind of also have duality, like if you're operating more in your upper energy centers, and then you have your lower energy centers. So coming together somewhat more vertically than horizontally of right and left. So in a sense, sometimes you can have almost four sides of duality, top, bottom, left, and right.
Yeah, that brings me back to the balancing we were talking about for a second there, because I love that Brittany brought up that we all have like very opposite spectrum energy. Because literally in my phone, one of you has like a fiery, like spicy emoji, and one of you has like a lighter, like sparkly emoji. It's even in my phone. So I love that our little tripod provides duality very well, which I love and appreciate with you guys so much.
Who is who, Ash?
So I don't know. That's a surprise for the listeners.
Yeah. That's so funny. I wonder what it feels like. So, if we're talking about duality in the spectrum of things, kind of what you touched on earlier, Ash, if you're looking at the frequencies high and low, how do they sit with you guys? Where do you see them? When do you find them coming up in your life? Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I really appreciate you asking that, because I feel like where I'm at now is vast, and the way I measure that is vastly different than where I started. So I'm gonna kind of just like speak about how I used to do that, just for the sake of the listeners to kind of understand where I was and where I am now. So when I first started my spirituality, I really got into some interesting topics, some very specific topics where you can't listen to low frequency music, eat low frequency food, keep low frequency people around you. They're dragging you down. They're lowering your vibration. You need a high vibration to ascend. You have to have all of this high vibrational things around you to be a good person, to be a good frequency. And I was like, yes, 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 I have the cheat codes now to live. I'm going to stop watching TV. I'm going to stop listening to my rap music that I absolutely love. And I'm going to be this mindful, high frequency baddie. That was my intention with it. And I spent a year extremely ungrounded, having panic attacks, and just not living my life. And within that year, it was healing, but it was massively within shadow work and triggering. And that wasn't even my intention. I thought I was raising my vibration, which, yes, healing comes from, but for me, the measurement of frequency is me knowing I'm authentically having a good time and living my best life, whether I'm eating McDonald's and listening to rap or meditating and talking to the birds. Both of those can have super high frequency energy to me based on my intention and how I'm utilizing that energy at that time. Whereas they could have low vibrations if I'm sitting there miserable and not enjoying my chicken nuggets, or if the birds are annoying me. It's a spectrum. They both have the same same energy.
I love that because I feel like I used to do that, feel like, oh, I need to meditate all the time or I need to be like listening to frequency music all the time. And then it got to the point where I'm like, but like my human's not happy. My human side is like, I need a day where I'm just gonna binge reality TV show. I need a day where I don't go outside. Or today I feel like I need to just go to the beach and put my feet in the water or, just kind of really you start feeling into what it is that your energy is actually needing. And sometimes that comes through in your mind, in your emotions, and kind of really starting to discern what it is and how your energy is operating at the time. Like, I don't necessarily always know that I feel like there's low vibe and high vibe. There can be, like you said, intention. It's all about the intention that gets put into it. Like, if I'm listening to something that I don't really resonate with, why would I keep listening to it? I'm going to move on to something that does feel better, that does give me joy or purpose, or just sometimes also just like a reset.
I really enjoy that because I think that it's so purposeful to really be able to kind of step outside of yourself and look at what's going on in your life and what that shows up as. And sometimes, even trying to be more high vibrational, you lower your vibration because with that comes judgment, comes, like I am a warrior of blah blah blah, or whoever, or I am, these I am statements, which are very masculine statements, right? And then you find the feminine, which is the lower vibrations, that is like, I am a part of the universe as a whole. So for me, that's where I find balance between the two. For me, high vibration is very, it's like a masculine energy. I am like, I'm gonna, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna kick today's ass, as where feminine is like, today I need to sit in a bath and I need to recharge and I need to be in tune with my emotions. So for myself, I know Ash was kind of saying, it's really interesting. She was saying, at the beginning of her journey, she was more high vibrational, or thinking she was, in that high vibrational frequency. For me, I've sat in the lower vibration frequency or let me not say frequency, the lower aspects of duality for quite a long time. Quite a long time. So I've done a lot of, this is why I say, like, I'm a shadow worker. I work a lot in the shadow. So I've done a lot of the emotional work, a lot of the emotional trauma healing. I've been more in touch with my feminine side, and I'm trying to really understand what that looks like now as my more masculine self. So now, all this really great work that I've done internally, I'm like, okay, now it's time to do work. So now I'm actually finding myself stepping away from a little bit more of my shadow work and stepping into more of like the light workers, if you could say that, which is, that doesn't roll off the tongue. If you can tell, that does not roll off my tongue. So as I'm navigating this, it's kind of important for me to realize not to judge those two sides of the same coin here, right? Um, at the end of the day, there is there's no light without darkness. And we need to hold on to that and remember that, it's important to have both.
Yes. I literally wrote that in my notes for today is touching on the shadow self and that light creates and shows our shadows. So like even earlier today had my candle and it's in like the I keep it in like a little type of bowl thing and I had it lit and I was looking at it and it was bright within the bowl, but then the shadow casts around it and it made me just like really sit and contemplate how much the light is actually showing, even though it may not always be things that we want to see, but it's important that we acknowledge them.
So we are recording this just so our listeners know if you listen to this at any time right before we're about to have a lunar eclipse. And that energy is spot on for what's occurring. So essentially, the sun and the moon are blocking the light and they're casting shadow upon the collective, upon the earth. So a lot of people are having moments of kind of like you might call it forced shadow work or maybe emotions coming to the surface that they hadn't looked at for a while, and a lot of the times that can come through as kind of like a wave or feeling like you're opening Pandora's box. And with the intention today of the episode and it kind of being about the dualistic energy of, yes, duality itself, but when it pertains to emotions, I'm interested to know if you guys have like a specific emotion that you'd like to share that you've experienced two spectrums of. So for me, I have a emotion of I'll kind of call I'll kind of call this emotion my worry emotion, I guess. Whereas when the duality of that emotion for me, if my worrying's coming from like a place of lack, a place of regret, a place of remorse, a place of like FOMO, like missing out. So if I'm trying to be not present and be energetically somewhere where I'm not, that's how I know my worry is kind of like on the more shadow side of dualistic energy, the more triggering side. Whereas if my worry is coming from kind of like anticipation for the future, excitement for kind of how my manifestations are going to show up, I know that that worry emotion for me is on potentially the lighter side of duality. So that one emotion can have a spectrum of frequency. So I always am passionate about saying, like, feel those emotions, do not push them away, because eventually they're going to come back disguised as something else to try and have a little chit chat with you.
Yeah, I like that idea, Ash. I think one of the things I recently just, as you girls know, but for the listeners, I just got back from my first like solo road trip, and it was completely life-changing and amazing and all the things. I 10 out of 10 recommend if you are ever considering going on a solo trip, do it without question, just do it. So a lot of the hesitation I had though with this, it kind of became like a last minute thought, and really I executed it all last minute because I was finding every reason not to do it because of the fear I had. And so I had to look at that fear, like what is that fear? And I for myself, I like to be like, I typically will say like, oh, I'm not afraid of anything. No, I had my ass handed to me. I am afraid of things. And so I really, I really enjoyed the fear that I had because it showed me that that is a very real emotion that sits within inside me. And I didn't know that I had that. So then I had to look at that side of it, which, again, going with like the more the shadow side of the emotion of fear, it was the fear of the unknown. It was the fear of failure. What if I mess something up? What if, there's also the fear of going to a new city and not knowing what was going to happen. And then there was the other side of fear, the lighter side of fear, which was I can conquer this. I'm capable of these things. This is a challenge. And so I took on those two things. And, you know, I really will say that the best part that came out of this experience for me was really like, I can and I am capable of anything. And not only that, but I can have a good time by myself. And I had such a good time, you guys. Like I cannot, I'm like, I really love myself. Like, I'm like so happy to be alone with myself and like have my thoughts and like just do me, And it was amazing. Like, I got to wake up when I wanted to wake up. I got to call whoever I wanted to call. I got to eat whatever I wanted to eat. I got to listen to the music I wanted to, you know what I mean? And I think for somebody who, um, I'm naturally a giver. So with being able to give back to myself. So just being able to have and face those fears, having those fears are so necessary, and being able to face them was even a greater like lesson that I never thought I would ever have the experience of. So I know for me, fear is the most it's the most challenging emotion that I've had thus far.
For me, fear is huge for me as well, but it also like kind of stems a lot. Like I have a lot of anxiety. So my anxiety lately is kind of been trying though to decipher, is it excitement or is it anxiety? Because I feel them in the same spots on my body. And like so if I'm having like my a girls' weekend with my best friend, I will then all of a sudden be like really anxious, but then I'm like, why am I anxious? Is this really anxiousness or is it excitement? Is it because I'm not used to being a weekend away from like my son and my husband? I have a lot of like thought patterns that go on. And that also then plays into, is this, the positive side or is it the more negative side of what I'm feeling and experiencing? Even like for instance, this weekend we had a kid's birthday party and I was like really anxious about going because I'm like, where are we going? Who's going to be there? We don't know any of these kids. It's our first time. What if he doesn't have fun? What if, you start going through all the things, but at the same time, I'm like, I'm so excited to see him with his friends. I can't wait to like it, just get to be a fly on the wall and see what kids do and how they interact because it was very like both sides, feeling excited to experience it, but also feeling fearful or nervous about the what ifs. It's always like the what ifs. One of the things I heard one time was instead of saying, what if this goes wrong, switching it to what if this goes right, switching that thought pattern and that questioning of yourself.
I once heard, I'm glad that you're talking about anxiety because I've felt my anxieties come up a little bit more. I thought it was something that I dealt with. And I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I used to suffer from anxiety attacks. And I over the last couple of years I really haven't had them, so I thought that I had control over them. And then I realized kind of the same thing that you're talking about, Nicole. And I know that we've recently spoken about this, which is like, is it excitement or is it anxiety, right? It's so hard to really see where those emotions are coming from. But this also goes back to like kind of what I was saying with like like separating your human self and your spiritual self, right? So being able to identify both parts can help you see where that sits. Like excitement would sit for me more in my spiritual self, as where anxiety, because it's a very real thing, would sit, not that spirituality is not, but anxiety would sit more in like the human aspects of me, right? It's really, really interesting to think about. And as a mom, we do care a little bit more about how it's going to affect our children because there is that fear of what can happen to them, right? But as a mom, you still want them to enjoy their life as much as you possibly can without taking away their fun, without projecting our fears onto them. And so that within itself is very hard to balance within your human self. So it's really, really interesting to kind of have to navigate this walk of duality in all aspects of life in whichever way that it shows up to you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you brought about like not projecting that onto to others because it is something where it's like when I go to the theme parks with my son, I can't do rides. Well, I in a limited capacity I can do rides because I have severe motion sickness, but I would always worry that he would see that I'm not going on rides and then him not want to do it because like, oh, well, if you're not doing it, I don't want to do it. And I'm very much like if you want to go, like experience it. Like I always have somebody with me that is able to do rides so that way he's not missing out if that's something that he wants to experience. But it is, a thought of I'm going through this and then how is it somewhat going to be perceived by others, even though like that's not, you don't really want to think about what others think of you, but the reality is that that's what happens.
I got a lot of thoughts. When it comes to the way that we perceive ourselves and the way that others perceive us, that's dualistic in its own, too, right? Which I think is super cool because we can hold a frequency and a perspective of ourself, which holds fractals, activations, and then how others perceive and have their perspective of us also holds energetic activations too in it. So essentially, how can I explain that differently? Essentially, what I mean by that is like the version of you that lives in people's heads and then the version of you that you are now, all of those are energy. And they can be vastly different throughout time and space, which holds to the duality of and how that energy shows up. So that's why I really think of duality as kind of like a spectrum, truly, of light and dark, of high and low, of solar and lunar. Solar and lunar comes up for me a lot in my own personal journey because dragons are very dualistic. They're very much balance and creation kind of teachers and beings, and they work a lot in the void, and they work a lot in the light, and they work a lot within the dark, and they work a lot in the shadow self, but also in the solar self. So it shows up a lot within my spiritual practice as well.
Let's talk a little bit more about working with like entities and what that looks like, if you guys are willing to share, or entities that maybe you've come across that that you can speak about, like their dualistic aspects. For myself, one of the demons that I work with is Lord Lucifer, and he very much has a dualistic aspect of him, where he is the most kind, the most loving, the most emotionally supportive. And I have really been happy and lucky enough to get to experience this side of him. I would say people who have not been able to work with him because of whatever reason, or are not willing to work with him for whatever reason, I think that there's fear behind that, right? And so, if and when he does show up, he will show up in a way that you have kind of already projected onto him, right? So, not everybody can work with demons and angels. And I've worked with angels as well, too, where I, even before I worked with Lucifer, I worked with Gabriel. And Gabriel, to me, I really enjoyed his presence. Him and Lucifer have a very similar an energetic signature to me. They're very similar. But, you wouldn't know for a practitioner who isn't well versed in working with entities if it was Lucifer or if it was Archangel Gabriel. And so it's funny that, like, we were kind of talking about like the projected aspect of duality. People can see Lucifer as the devil, and then some people like myself see him as the light bringer. He encompasses everything that is good and beautiful in existence to me. So I know that you mentioned working with dragons, Ash, and how they work. Nicole, is there any entity that you've come across where you've gotten to experience the duality of them?
Yeah, so I think for me would be Hecate. She comes in very much to me, motherly, kind, protective. So with that protection, it comes with fuck around and find out, you know? Um she's gonna, she's not gonna mess around. So there also comes with like a big respect with that. So I get to see both sides of her where, she can be kind and gentle, but she's also very, this is what it is. I think in that sense, I've dealt with like her mostly dualistic nature. And I respect her for that. And if anything, she has also helped me step more into that boundary that it's okay to be a little hard. You don't have to be soft about everything.
Mm, I love that. Yeah. I found that with it's really interesting because I found that with working with entities like our ooh, maybe this is not for this episode, but I found that when working with entities, the way that we perceive them is through our own filters. So if they show up to you, like you mentioned, Hecate being very motherly, I've also experienced her like that as well. Really, just like a beautiful, yeah, just like a beautiful energy, but she is also the one that I won't say that I fear the most, but she's the one that I will not test her boundaries. No, nope, not going to happen for me. So it's funny because I think that the human filter that we have can also be the way that we experience them, right? And that's something that's so important to remember about everything within duality is whatever our filter is, whatever our whatever way that we perceive, I guess for lack of a better term, like messages from spirit, we also have a human filter with that. So that's something to remember. So my with me saying that, the reason I'm saying that is try to not lean into so much of what words are defined as. Lean more into how it feels for you, where it sits for you, what that means to you. Because working in the shadow for me is extremely beneficial. Working in the light, I'm like really hesitant to do, but I'm going to lean into those things because I trust myself. I trust my team. I trust the universe, right? And I know that I need to have that balance within myself in order to be the best version of myself that I'm able to be.
Lucifer's gonna love that he was mentioned. Yeah, I definitely got the dualistic boundaries side of Hecate. I personally am also kind of a fuck around and find out. So when we're both together, it's chaos. Anyway, when it comes to like me and working with these energies, I know that about myself. So if I'm entering a space with an energy that's also like that, I know we're probably not going to mesh very well because I go into energy wise very assertive, very boundaries, very much okay, what's the tea? Let's get stuff done. I'm not going to just chit chat and, that kind of vibrational frequency. So I love that it's like dualistic even with the way that we interact with these beings, we work with these beings. And I also think that the way they work with us is kind of a, how can I phrase that? Kind of a perspective shift within their own frequency. And what I mean by that is essentially like this one being can work with one specific, I'll mention Lilith, for example. So I've known Lilith to work with people on maternal wounds, witches wounds, activations, uh, demon healing. Like she brings a lot of different topics and different energies to beings, and that's because she's very dualistic. And anyone who's listening to this, you are also very dualistic. That's why you have a lot of gifts, you have a lot of emotions, you have a lot of thoughts. You are a spectrum of gifts, emotions, and thoughts. And that's why sometimes it's confusing when you try to label and put yourself in a box of this full spectrum of energy, whether you want to label your emotion, your gifts, your purpose. Try and have that be a potential validating aspect, but don't hold on to that for too long because that could allow you to miss out on another full end of spectrum energy for yourself.
Yeah, that was a great way to put that, Ash. I'm glad that you said that because I think when we start to label those things, we definitely miss out on a lot of what we can experience just in a singular moment. So I find it. And this is kind of going back to like how the entities can work with people in a dualistic nature, right? Where I know for you, Lucifer doesn't like his name mentioned on certain lives. He may not even want you to mention it on this podcast. For me, I find that it's okay for me. So I we'll see how it goes. But for me, I think it's totally fine. So, they show up in different ways for us. And for you, it could be something that makes you uncomfortable. For me, I'm totally comfortable with it. So, like, and it goes with Lilith. Like, I don't work with Lilith. I've never worked with her. I wouldn't feel comfortable, maybe necessarily speaking about her any more than I am now because of that. I don't know how she would want me to work with her or how she would want me to speak of her or any of that.
So, are we ready for our affirmation?
Yeah.
I end each day knowing I have accomplished enough. I want to repeat it. I end each day knowing I have accomplished enough. And when I think about that, I think about also that dualistic nature of we need to do this, do this, do this, do everything, and then feel like we didn't do anything. And where does that pressure come from? Where is that coming from? That we feel like anything that we did, it's not enough. And That's that can be very heavy for so many people. I know it's something I've worked on is accepting that if I sat on the sofa today because I needed to do that to be better, a better version of myself later or tomorrow or even in the next 5 minutes, that's okay.
I love it. I love the word enough because that is like the epitome of duality, right? The way you perceive enough, the way you measure enough, that's the spectrum. And we just 360 this podcast back to the beginning when we were talking about programming. Because to me, that would be the answer to how do I measure this? How is this something that I determine within myself? it's based on nature versus nurture psychology, right? Like the people around you and also the environment around you. That is a big, huge part of this. But also, like, you're a cool soul that has like quantum consciousness. So that's also a fun little indicator in there. But I love the word enough because that is such a dualistic word to me. I appreciate you sharing that. I really enjoyed that.
I'm laughing because I feel personally attacked. I am 100% that person that does all the things and so much more, and I sit down at the end of the day and I'm like, "I accomplished nothing." So, I appreciate the reminder, Nicole, and even I know you and Ash both remind me quite often to relax, and it's just not my nature. And it's just there's just so many things to experience and do. Why not just do them all? But no, I really do. I'm understanding the older and older I get, I truly am. One, because physically, it's just not happening. It's not happening for me anymore, sis. Okay. And so I do need to take those moments to realize that, you know what, even if I woke up today and I just sat around on the couch, I'm still doing something for myself, which is relaxing. And it is enough. It is definitely enough. And even though I fight against it, I'll be all right. At the end of the day, everything's going to be just fine. And we get to wake up to a new tomorrow. So I appreciate the affirmation. I feel attacked still, though. So
If the shoe fits, you're
yes,
able to
ma'am.
grow. You're able to
Then
grow.
call me Cinderella. Okay.
So, I just wanted to kind of add that within the capacity of, day to day action based versus rest based duality. I'm obsessed. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Well, I appreciate you girls sitting around and chatting about this. I hope we didn't squirrel it too much and our neurodivergent brains didn't go too off topic, specifically me. I'm kidding. But I do just want to thank you for tuning in to today's episode and expanding within conscious conversations. We now close the sacred space with love and gratitude. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay connected. We'll see you guys next time.